Okay. Um, so is it typical for you to prioritize your picks on females? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And this is again when I tried to tell you about the garage test and why Oni was the best I ever had. But he was, well, maybe he's not the prettiest dog, although I think he turned out quite decent. I kind of like him, but maybe I'm biased because I love his temperament. And when I had him in that garage test, I still look at that video every now and then. That little tiny puppy, I put him down there and he was like, hey, that's a cool place to be. He found a towel that was hanging over a chair with wheels on it. So he would bite into that towel and drag the chair through the whole garage. Something fell down, he just didn't bother. Then I would call him and he would come right away to me. So for me, that was the right amount of checking out on me, coming when I tried to get him. He was just a puppy, so I have a puppy call when I feed him. So I just did that, and he would come immediately, but still with his little prey toy there. Um, Very adventurous, outgoing, happy, not scared at all. But when I signalized I would interact with him, he was right there. And this is what he's like up to
Yeah,
today.
it's interesting you say that because there's a lot of truth in that, and I love your transparency about it because when I look at Oni, and I said this to Leanne, I didn't care for his look. Like I didn't care for his type. Um, but as a breeder, there's a point to where you have to weigh the entire dog. And when the temperament is overwhelmingly in the green, let's say the green, the positive, um, you're more susceptible to having to let go of that kind of phenotype that you're known for. And I feel like that dog, when I look at him physically, doesn't necessarily represent you as a program. And I was going to get to this and ask you about him directly because there seems to be some ownership that you've really taken on with him because he has been something that clearly behind the scenes has checked a lot of boxes. But like when I look at his phenotype, I wouldn't say that that's been typical for your program. And I think that's fair to say. So with
Yeah.
him, what are the plans to move forward with him based on his phenotype? And now that obviously he's grown into the dog that you expected him to grow into. Um, what is your plans to breed him, and how would you do that to get back to maybe what I'll call home base with your typical phenotype?
To be honest, he's not that far apart. He has a couple of traits that or that seem to make him appear that way, but if you look closely at him, he isn't. There's a picture of his mother and him side by side where you see the head profiles of both, and they are literally the same. And then you add Fafanaki on that, and she fits into that as well. One factor is his markings. They have a weird thing that they do to his head. One thing is that he is slightly. It's not even longer in coat because he has no long coat genes at all. It's just he has more coat than a bulldog should have. Full stop.
Yeah,
Or than most
I
have
have some of
actually.
that too. I've got a couple things going on within my stuff that's interesting. A Prophet seems to throw, I don't know that I would call it a long coat, but I would definitely say it's thick, like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
a
yeah,
very
yeah.
full coat. And then India's side of stuff throws a very soft coat gene, which I don't know what that comes from, but it's almost so fine that it like makes you itch when you get close to those dogs that have that thing. Um, okay, that's interesting. Let me talk about something that I have kind of encountered and I use in my selection process, and you've briefly touched on, is markings. So In your selection process, do you take markings into an accountability based on previous genetic makeup?
No,
0.
no, zero.
Really?
I would keep anything. Well, I would really struggle with a full black head or brindle head. It needs to have some white
Let me
on it.
clear
So I want a white dog with
patch
markings, but the markings. Mhm,
and like a secular marking on his top of his head, maybe like what we would call a dot.
mhm,
If you got offspring
yeah,
off of him that had similar markings, the dot, maybe a different eye patch, would you be more inclined to keep him, assuming that that puppy's genetic makeup lends more towards Baxter than another dog?
no,
Really? Okay.
no, no,
Have you seen that in
no.
your offspring when you evaluate even dogs that you sold to pet homes, that markings that were similar to the parents took after those parents' genetics?
Mm, I don't know. I've never really paid attention to
Really?
that
Okay.
because markings are really well. The only advantage of two eye patches is you don't have to worry
Pigment.
about the
Yeah.
pigment.
But, I mean, for
So
me, I've noticed, and maybe it's just me, and I've heard other breeders talk about it, but, like, for me, there's a high probability that if a dog's markings take after one parent or the other, that that dog almost automatically carries a higher percentage of those genes. And I've used that in my breeding program.
but that can't be. It's 50-50. It's
Ah,
always
that's what you say.
50-50. It has to
That's what you
be.
say. But I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean,
But
let's
you
talk
know
about
what?
this.
One
Yeah,
interesting
go on.
thing. One interesting thing. If they've tried that, if you clone cats, yeah, piebald cats, yeah, you clone them, they do not have the same markings.
Yes, and I think you're correct. When you clone dogs or cats or any animal, I don't know that you get the exact markings from
No,
the
you
dog you
don't.
cloned it. But when you look at Fafanaki and you look at Baxter, the markings and the coloration of the dogs are very similar and they lend to each other.
Yeah, but
Eh,
you should look at the whole
Oh,
litter, the whole Baxter litter. They all had these eye
yeah.
patches.
Well, so let's talk. So yeah, all right. Well, I mean, and this is why we have these conversations because realistically, I'm picking your brain as a breeder to a breeder to figure out what you've seen. And that's what I think is the most interesting as far as the conversation lends itself to. Let's talk about Stephanie's puppy, Bolt. Bolt was the first time that you line bred on Fafanaki?
Let me think. I think so. Well, slightly tiny little bit when I used Bevan on Holly, but that was further away because Bevan is the Baxter
Mhm.
son, and Holly goes back to Cookie,
Okay.
who goes back to
Yeah.
Fafanaki.
But this is the first time that you've technically line bred on Fafanaki, which would be Baxter's mother, and in that
Yeah.
result, that pup is probably maybe not as far as, like, phenotype at the age to Baxter, I don't think they line up exactly, but when I look at those markings and I see that pup, the first dog that comes to mind is Baxter, and
Yeah, those markings are pretty
yeah,
similar. That's
yes,
true.
and I feel like that dog has a high probability of finishing very similar to Fafanaki or Baxter, which both honestly for male to
Yeah.
female, the phenotype was almost identical.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so too. But I think that actually applies to the whole litter. But the others have more white
Mhm.
heads, therefore it's maybe not that obvious. But the puppy I had for, oh, I think he left 2 weeks ago. I'm still sad. I maybe should have kept him. But no, I don't need a second male. But I was really in love with that puppy, and that was number two that Stephanie was after. So
That
he
was
was actually my
and he was an
second
all white
pick.
pup with kind of good black pigment.
He had one round spot on the back, but he had an all
Yeah.
white head. But he was almost full pigment by the time
Yeah.
he left.
Yeah, he was a sharp pup, and probably I should have just told Stephanie to pick him up and bring him back here, but, um, how does it make you feel that, you're known for Baxter, right? Like, that's kind of the face of your program, and the pup that Stephanie took, could arguably be Baxter number 2. Does that d does that keep you up at night at all, thinking about, like, well, maybe
No, yeah, that's fine because I'm so happy that she has him because that means I have access to
Yes.
him and he will be shown to his full potential. She will be doing some sort of working stuff with him. So rather than him disappearing in some pet home, I know him being in Canada where at least I have access. I can get some frozen semen back and all is good.
Yeah, I agree with that. Sometimes I worry, like this dog Banksy that I have. Ideally, when I had the litter, I would have loved to find him a co-owned home. Um, but the genetic makeup of the breeding was so important to me that I wasn't willing to let it go to a co-owned home of a stranger. So we ended up keeping him
Yeah.
here, and now he's grown into a dog that, honestly, he just encompasses that line of dogs. I mean, through and through, just genetic makeup, physically, the phenotype, and then, everything that he has mentally is everything that's ever been in that bloodline. Um, and to this day, as much as I say I'd love to put him with somebody that I trust, part of me says, "I don't think I could
Yeah.
do it." I just don't know. Like like and I
Yeah,
have this
so I
I
think
have
it's
this problem.
very certain with Stephanie. That was a good move for me. And then I also have a brother to that with a friend of mine. She already has a sister, a brother to
Mhm,
Rico. So we are really close. So that's in my inner circle, so
yeah.
to speak. And then I have one with another breeder from Lithuania. I would have access to that one. So from the 6 males, there's at least three I have access to. And the one that I gave to the last home, she's more a pet home. I asked her if she would do the health testing. She said so far she would. So I'm even hopeful that maybe at some point I have number four available and
Are you
accessible.
saying there's American Bulldogs in Lithuania?
Yeah.
That's strange. I mean, the thing about Americans is we live in our own little bubble. We barely recognize half of the world, so it's a weird place to be. But, especially with a breed that was kind of its roots and staples are here. The unfortunate truth uh, to just that is that, I think that other countries, if I look at this correctly, when I kind of evaluate the global scene of American Bulldogs, that other countries have kind of taken breeding a little bit more seriously than the United States. I feel like the dogs have fallen off a little bit from what their true nature of the animal is has truly meant to be. Part of that is probably driven by modern times and the lack of necessity for a dog that would go out and maybe be a utility animal. But I think here uh, there's just some people that get involved with the breed that have and we all know who those kennels are that have bred to the extremes to create these like super typey animals but lack uh the true nature of what the breed was meant to be. And that's getting tougher to navigate here because, a lot of dogs are bred to the extremes. And with that being said, if you're trying to stay true to the breed and trying to kind of move it forward and keep some ownership of what the temperament and mentality was supposed to be, it's really tough to find another dog that fits that bill to use. Even to the point where I know of another bully American Bulldog breeder that's been struggling to find a male pup for himself because of just a myriad of different issues, tainted pedigrees, just not bred tight enough. And for me as a breeder, really bred they are really weighs into that. Has that been something you've considered of just?
No, actually, the pedigree is important to a point because from the very beginning, I had some insight. So I know quite a few of these dogs in these pedigrees, or at least know where they come from and what their background is. And I would really struggle if I see a lot of dogs that I know have potentially maybe thrown temperament issues or health issues. But other than that, I actually don't care if that pedigree is not too tightly bred, as long as the dogs in there somehow fit to each other type wise or complement each other type wise. Because when I started breeding, well, I went to university and I'm a teacher, so I like believe that others that maybe wrote a book about it that are scientists in this area. So I believe in this science. So I read these books or read these books at the point to find out. And there was some guy, and that was a Malcolm, whatever. He was a doctor, and he wrote a book about genetics, dog genetics, and breeding practices. And he said you can reach a target with inbreeding, fix a type relatively quick, but you may also bring issues up to the table that you never knew of. While you can also reach the same target a lot slower by just breeding type to type. So if you pick your dogs of same type, even though their pedigrees may not match at all, in the end you will still fix a type, but it will last longer.
Hmm.
But you also have a less high risk of terrible things popping up.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I get the premise behind that. So basically, instead of crunching down on a pedigree, whether the type was consistent or not, if you live in a pedigree that's 3 or 4 generations of a similar type, that you should be accountable for that type. The unfortunate truth is genetically you may end up with some diversity with issues in a scatterbred pedigree. Um,
But diversity is key to healthy dogs. It definitely
so
is.
have you seen a better outcome? Let's ask that. Have you seen a better outcome with your outcrosses than your inbreedings or your line breedings?
Yeah. Line breedings, well, I think also it depends on the dog. And your line breeding can only be as good as the line you are breeding in on. And sometimes it's really hard to know what are you breathing in on because not everyone is transparent and really tells you what's in their lines, even though they may know. Sometimes they may not even know, and it just pops up and is a big surprise for everyone. But sometimes it's not, but just no one ever told you, and you have to find out the hard way by experiencing it. I, as I said, I experienced that my Aussie Chestnut'S Cherokee, you could line breed on him. Even I would say half brother to half sisters, even in inbreeding, that worked out fairly well, and we never had some bad things popping up. But when I did these other inbreedings on the Burma stuff, that really caught me, and taught me to be cautious and very careful of what I
So
do.
would you say that your general mindset now is to outcross, or is there a point where you're like, no, there's a purpose to or line breeding or inbreeding?
I think if I could find the right dogs to complement my plans, I would prefer the outcross. But on the other hand, it's not so easy. We all know that there's not, well, there is a limited number of dogs, and the population is not
Mhm.
huge. So in the end, I may end up having to do line breedings that are maybe closer than I want them to, if I don't want to go too far apart from my type.
Well, and that's what I was gonna lead you into that. I was setting you up for failure. Um, so when we talked about initially, and you kind of reached this milestone of Fafanaki and Baxter, and they're very similar in type, and maybe that was your preferred type. Without line breeding, it's hard to maintain that. So, even though if you try to pick complementary dogs that aren't related, um, it's not a guarantee that you're going to find, a consistent result. So at some point, if for me, if your goal was an identifiable type to, little chestnuts, you would have to rely on some type of line breeding or inbreeding versus kind of consistently picking dogs that maintain that same kind of type and hoping for, consistent results. Um, it's kind of a tough way to navigate. Um, I've more subscribed to line breeding and inbreeding using outside dogs to kind of what I'll call infuse some genetic diversity, but then go right back into crunching down on my own stuff to kind of keep that certain type honed in. And then within that, I guess I would say, knowing that what those dogs throw within their own bloodline, trying to correct some of those things with that infusion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So for me at this point, I don't know that I want to jump off yard a lot unless let's say which I've come to an agreement with Maggie to use one of her dogs. I would either, if I'm gonna use that dog, there's 2 ways I'm gonna go about it. Either I'm gonna infuse that dog into my stuff with a tightly bred dog and then take that offspring and breed it right back into its own stuff, or I'm gonna take that dog off of Maggie and breed him to 2 different related females and then crunch back down on Maggie's dog, if I saw that the results were what I desired, and maybe splinter off something onto its own with my stuff and her stuff kind of uh mixed together. Is that how do you kind of go about your breeding plan? Like when you start looking at the 5 dogs in your house, how do you kind of map out your 4 females and your male? Where's that going?
So I do it a little differently in that I don't have plans long ahead, like I breed this to that and keep something to breed that back to that. It's a bit different because I wait to see what's around by the time the female I may be capped is up for a breeding. So health testing done, and she's about 2 years old. Then I look around what is available and complements her the best with my ideal picture of the American Bulldog in the head. Yeah. So I cannot say today Well, I'm actually going to have a puppy from Stephanie, from her current breeding, but I can't tell you what I'm going to do with her because that depends on what she turns out to be like. And I can't know that today. There's so many possibilities that dog may turn out. And then I can decide, and I am buying that puppy so I can use my own males. Because I'm in a position where I really can't unless it's getting too close. The closest one I will maybe consider doing is only to Tim Tam, which appears maybe quite extreme, because Tim Tam is on the smaller side while Oni is huge. And it's a bit like with Stephanie's dog Dio, you have to see and experience him to understand how much dog
Mm.
he is. While Tim Tam is really like on the bottom edge of the standard and relatively small. I think that temperaments will complement each other, and if you really try to exclude size and code and markings, they are not so far apart.
But don't you find that you would have more accountability using your own blood more concentrated than you would kind of reaching off yard more consistently and having to go through a long-term evaluation process? You know, when I produced this dog Banksy that we've spoke of, it was a half sibling breeding. The male, well, the female and the male were half siblings. The opposite partners in that breeding were half brothers. So it was kind of similar to what you said when you did the half siblings with related litter mates. It was just one step away from that.
Yeah.
And the breeding was amazing. It produced six males that were all phenomenal. Could have kept any one of them, been super happy with it. But the one thing I can tell you with doing that was that litter was super, super accountable for not only phenotype, which would be a given, but just the general disposition and temperament of the dogs felt right into the bloodline that I crunched down on. Um, when you're kind of consistently reaching out and going off yard, I feel like there's a huge learning curve with every dog because you're kind of questioning, well, did this come from the new stuff or is this a part of the old stuff that I didn't wasn't aware of? Mostly with temperament kind of related issues. But do you find it more challenging kind of being a little looser in your selection process?
Um, I think one reason is that it might be a cultural difference in itself. Like, if you look at these pit bull guys, inbreeding, they do inbreedings all day long, without hesitations, and they go as close as father to daughter, mother to son. And in Germany overall, in most breed clubs, and Germany is quite organized in these breed clubs. So we have the VDH which is our FCI club. The American Bulldog has no FCI recognition, therefore we can't breed in the VDH. But that club sets quite strict rules about inbreedings and how close you can
And what
get.
are
I think maybe if you're a little view into that, the closest you can do that is, and I think you even need an approval to do that. You need to write a letter and ask them to be allowed to do a 2-3
a
inbreeding.
3-2 is too tight in potentially?
Yes, in German Shepherds, it
Okay.
definitely is. But they have a huge Jeep where they have so many dogs, but yeah, you can't. You just can't.
So
And it's the same for other
so is that a
breeds.
stipulation that you're regulated to, or is that just something you have
No,
adopted?
I can do what
Okay,
I want.
okay.
Of course, I'm not a member there. But it just explains why I come from this
I got
culture where inbreeding is just no
yes.
thing. We just don't do it. It's just a no
Yeah,
go.
it's interesting because when I talked to Stephanie,
Um,
she had same reservations about it. Um, which for me, um I've done a mother-son breeding, and it produced 3 puppies, and 2 of the 3 were very consistent to um, I the mother's phenotype. And so when I say that, the mother to son breeding, the son was a scatterbred dog. The mother was not line bred on herself typically. So the only common ancestry was the mother to the son. It wasn't tighter than that, which created 2 dogs, one of which, well, both of which it created 3 dogs, 2 of which are in my program today, that haven't been used, but obviously genetically, they both fit the mother's phenotype. And I was just literally having this conversation today with Leanne about Prophet to his daughter, Sway, who those 2 dogs complement phenotype almost identically. Sway is the female Prophet. Um, and I've always heard through other podcasts with breeding guys that if you're going to line breed on, or if you're going to inbreed on a dog, that the dog that you inbreed on should be your target. As far as like, so most people use the male.
Yeah,
Most people use the male.
yeah,
So
yeah.
in this instance, I've considered doing that, breeding, because I did have a lot of success with that other breeding, and I've had a lot of success with half siblings. Um, where I've had less success is the 3-2 breedings, which is kind of where you're kind of asking for permission, but probably is a little bit more acceptable, if you will. Obviously, if you're getting tighter than that, you're asking for way more forgiveness per se. But those tighter breedings have actually lent me to a very consistent result. Um, and I haven't had anything truly negative pop up. Um,
Maybe that works for American Bulldogs better than for other breeds because they are a mixed breed at the very
I agree with
beginning.
that statement, and I've said this numerous times that I feel like we're in a glorified band dog breeders that have kind of we started off with a collection of dogs that we've all continued to breed on, so we haven't really opened the net with new breeds, but I still think we're definitely in a band dog type mentality when you're building these dogs. Um, Fortunately, there's enough American Bulldogs out there that we can kind of maneuver well. But I still think because of the disparity in the types, we all still navigate towards, the perfect dog for us in our program. Um, so Okay, so interesting, culturally, there's definitely kind of a bias to breeding too tight. Um, you obviously have only kind of experimented with it to some degree because of maybe that cultural bias and moving your program forward. So, with that being said, where is the future of your program with regards to how you're gonna navigate with the future breedings that you plan to have?
Well, as I said, I may do the Tim Tim Oni breeding, which will go back to an inbreeding actually to
Okay.
Cookie. Um, I may do that and see what it brings me. I know that it will. Worst case, they will just be
Mhm.
nice pets. Well, they will still have a working temperament, but just maybe they won't be the show dogs. I don't know, but I just have to do it to find out. Um, so then I will have. I still have Oni's sister
Mhm.
actually. For she's in a co-owned home. I've bred her to Pusher from Maggie one time. That were only 3 puppies, so it's actually hard to judge whether it was a success or not. I'm still thinking to redo it, although I've always been completely against repeat breedings. Because if the first breeding, well, we had, I heard that before in another podcast. if the first breeding didn't bring you what you want, why repeat it? If the first breeding brought you what you want, why
Right,
repeat
exactly.
it? So, and it doesn't tell you any more about the female. It's just I only had three puppies with only one female. I like all three of them dogs, but yeah, maybe I would want another female from that. I still have to think about it. I still have pusher semen here, so it wouldn't be that big of a deal to redo it. And at the moment, the other option would be for that female to use that bullseye dog.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And that will also be loose line breeding again.
Loose as in how
Be-
loose? Like a
well, bullseye is out of Bevan and
okay.
Holly. Holly's out of
Mhm.
Cookie, and Zola's out of Cookie.
Okay, so it'd be what would that be a 3-2?
I would have to see it
Okay.
on paper. I'm very
Yeah.
bad in having
Yeah,
that.
that bullseye dog.
The,
I know I've asked you this about behind the scenes.
he's
When
a
I was
cool
going through
dog.
all your stuff today, that bullseye dog, the phenotype is pretty damn sharp. And
He's cool, and he has a very cool temperament and working ethics too.
yeah, that dog should definitely come to the United States. I think you should talk him out of owning that dog. I'll send him like 3 or 4 of his puppies. I don't care, but let's bring him here. No, he's a
I
sharp
don't think
dog.
he would get that dog.
He's a sharp dog. With that being said, it's just kinda sad anymore, and maybe your feelings are different than mine, but I will say this, there was a time and a place in this breed where you could see a lot of litters, and you were as a another breeder, you were enamored by those pups. You were like, "Wow, that's a sharp looking litter. I would take a dog off that litter." And I rarely see that anymore. I've got my eye on one litter right now that I may, I've talked to the breeder about maybe bringing in something brand new, totally different than what I'm used to having. Um, it's a tight litter, it's a tight breeding. So, for that, it has value. Either the dog's going to totally turn out or totally wash out. Um, but I think for me moving forward, genetically, I always want to see a dog it's one of two things. It's very tightly bred and crunched down, or that the first three generations, every dog in that litter almost looks identical to each other, and has some accountability. Um, but with that being said, when you're talking about using guest stud, and you're obviously far removed from most of the dogs that are in the gene pool right now, short of a handful of breeders that are within Germany or in Europe. Um, what are you using as your criteria? What's most important to you when you talk about bringing in some new blood?
Well, first of all, I have to simply like the dog for its type. Well, I don't know them personally because I don't get a chance to meet them in most cases. When they're in Europe, of course, I would go and have a look at them, but I have to like them. So one of these examples is actually Blue,
Mhm.
Stephanie's Blue. I saw him on pictures and I thought, Ma, I like that dog. Yeah, for my taste, his muzzle is a bit too long, but other than that, I really like the way his body is built. His front and his rear end, I really like him. So he's the one to complement my Cookie. And this is actually how I work. It was time for Cookie to be bred, and I was looking around what's available, what would complement her the best. And I had the feeling about this dog, and I have to say that this breeding really clicked. The ex litter, they turned out really nice. I had bad luck. The male I kept from that litter turned out to have an ED2. He never had issues, but no way I could breed him. Not knowing that. He ended up in a pet home. He's all happy, chunky, fat now, but however, he turned out nice, and so were the females, and the whole litter in the end, actually. So I got from Blue what I wanted. I would have wished I could have had that male and kept on breeding with him, but I couldn't. Then so, but at least I got the chance to get a hold of Holly, who's from that
Mhm.
litter too. She's not 100% my type of dog, but still structurally very sound, very clean, nice muscle, nice temperament. So I got a chance to have a litter with her, which I did with Bevan, to do a loose blind breeding thing. From there, I have now Bullseye. Well, Volker has him, but I have access to him. Um, there's a couple more, and actually, all these puppies turned out pretty nice. But with Ole or Bullseye being the nicest, I don't really have to chase the others down. Um, and this is how I do it. So now, yeah, I see the females that I have, and I see what's out there, what complements them the best. And of course, I also have a look at the pedigree and make sure that that fits to a point. But I also see the overall actual dog that's there and make a decision on that.
So
And then maybe I keep something back from Zola, and maybe I do breed only to Tim Tam and keep something back from there, and then combine that and move forward with
so
that.
how are you there's 2 things I wanna ask you. A, you've had quite a few litters over the years. How have you only really maintained yourself at 5 dogs? Like, if you have 1 litter a year and you keep something off of every litter, I mean, one would seem to lead that you're gonna
But they don't stay necessarily at
yeah,
my
the males you're
house.
putting in co-own.
Yeah, and then I don't necessarily keep a
Okay.
female. And then when we come back to Fafanaki and the litters she has had, from the first litter, I kept the Kiowa
Mhm.
female. Second litter was with Lennox, so I didn't keep one myself, but I had access to three if I wanted to. Baxter, Connor is Lintu at
Mhm.
McLeod's, and the other one was Cash. That was his call name. His pedigree name was
Okay.
Lonato. Very standard
Yeah.
looking dog. But of all those three, Baxter was absolutely my favorite, so no need to really deal with the others. I did, as I said, one breeding with Connor because he was a bit more on the bully side. He actually looked like a light version of a daily dog.
Yeah, and I was gonna ask you, so, w first of all, let's go to did you just get lucky picking Baxter?
No, he was my personal pick.
Did you pick
He was my personal
but did you
pick.
pick him because he looked like his mother?
No, I picked him because he was the coolest
I
puppy in the
gotcha.
litter. He was really cool. So like I weigh my puppies for the first 2 weeks
Mhm,
minimum, but sometimes even a bit longer. And he was that puppy you will pick out of the whelping box, put it on the scale. It's all wobbly,
mhm.
these scales, and he would stay there, tail up and all happy. Um, just enjoying the attention and being picked out there. So then I liked his type. He was not too bully, he was not too standard looking, he was right in the middle, and therefore he was my pick.
I wanna ask you a couple things. So, is Baxter your preferable type, what you just described?
Yeah,
And do you
yeah.
feel like we're doing ourselves a disservice to the breed when we have the 2 types and we're not just all breeding to the middle?
Mm, I think we should all
Yeah.
breed to the
I
middle.
kind of agree with that.
I know it's maybe not a very popular
And,
opinion these days, but
I
that's
don't
just
know that
mine.
it's not a popular opinion these days because honestly, anybody that's really taken the breed seriously is all breeding to the middle. I mean, even Stephanie has self-admittedly started off on the standard side and then now is yeah, you start seeing her come to a little bit to the to the other side and
Yeah, but honestly, look at her very first female. She looks like a hybrid.
yeah, yeah,
The
yeah,
first one, not Phoebe, but the
yeah.
other
No,
one.
I agree with that. Um Yeah, but I think anybody, even Maggie is, I guess quintessentially a standard breeder, but again, I've gone on record to say I've seen some pups in rings where I'm like, "Well, that dog could honestly go either way," and
Yeah, that's why I like her
when
dog
you
so
talk about a
much.
Bacchus or somebody and you look at the dog's phenotype, it's like, well, she calls it standard, and I don't call it necessarily bully, but I don't necessarily call it standard either. So it's interesting. And with that being said, you know, Baxter himself, I think I counted he's been used 11 times maybe? Does that seem about right?
That sounds a
Yeah, well,
lot, but maybe you're
that's what's
right.
on pedigree databases, and it doesn't seem like anybody that I've seen, and I didn't go too deep down the rabbit hole, but it doesn't seem like anybody to date has really line bred on him. Although, the bulk population of what I'll call the hybrid enthusiast all will use that dog as a podium dog to kind of emulate. We're all trying to move towards that dog because of his type. Um, I think maybe now there may be a little bit more of a thought process to line breed on him. Um, But, as far as when I look at his productions and the dogs, it's been a little bit of a there's definitely some disparity between the females he's been used on, so I can't expect consistent
Yeah,
results. But what would
yeah.
you say has been his shining what's the one quality that you see that does come from his offspring at this point that you can say that's notable to him?
I think first of all, it has to be the right female. So, and if it is the right female, he also seems to throw his type and maybe even a little bit
Mm,
bullier than
mhm,
himself. So, if you look at
mhm.
Bevan, his son, I actually really like him and I like the whole breeding that Laurent and
Yeah, that breeding stood
Florence
out to
did
me
there.
for sure.
Yeah, and she was one of the nicest females I would say he has been bred to outside my
Mhm.
kennel. If not the nicest. Yeah, I think she's by far the nicest. Well, I also like the some. Well, I've not seen all of them. Some of the results that were born in Australia.
With Sherry? Yeah.
Sherry, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I like
Yeah,
liked some of the.
when you bred him to Waco more recently, um I felt like that was a good breeding. Like, I felt like even though the pups are young.
I still
Yeah.
think so. I'm
Yeah,
happy
yeah.
with that.
Even though the pups
Yeah,
are young, it definitely looks to have produced, and that was be line bred on Baxter's mother, correct? Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, but
Mhm.
as I said, I was careful to do that because I'm a bit scared of the thoughts she had popping
Yeah.
up again.
Um, do you feel like I'm gonna put you on the spot here. Do you feel like the right breeding for a Baxter offspring would be some form of daily blood if it could pass all the health testing?
Oh yeah, yeah, I would
Yeah.
like that. I would still like to infuse a daily dog into my program,
Yeah. The
anyways,
unfor
if I could find the
Yeah,
right
and
one.
trust me, I've been searching. Trust me, if there's a person out there right now that has a daily dog and hasn't heard from me, you could reach out to me, but I have been searching. I have been doing, because I have had luck, um, infusing daily blood into my stuff, and, if anybody follows my program, my graffiti line is a very performance bully type style dog that does really well and lends really well to that daily influence. if you plug a little daily in there, you get that beautiful head type. It created Biggie. It created a dog named Star that's beautiful. Um, and there's a lot that goes into that, that is kind of created that really nice head type with a very performance style body, with super wide open nares and just that prey drive to get down and do something.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
and I
yeah,
love
yeah,
that.
yeah. They have a lot
I
of
love that,
respect. Yeah,
and it
they do.
I I hate to think that Jeff Daly has washed out his own breeding program based on health testing, and I'm hopeful that, I can turn up enough rocks and find something that's infused enough still.
If you find one,
Oh,
let me
you know what?
know.
If I find one, I'm probably, gonna put that dog on a pedestal because I've asked a couple people that currently have some daily offspring, um, that, haven't really have done some health testing. It isn't really where I wanna see it. So I can't, and the unfortunate truth is I love a daily dog. Like, there's no denying that I do love it. The
Yeah,
unfortunate truth is I've gotta find a clean one because at the end of the day, I
yeah.
don't wanna take a step backwards, and it would be a shame to see that his bloodline is kind of, washed itself out based on that because he's done a great job, and I've studied his pedigrees enough to see how he's gotten to the consistency within his dogs phenotype wise, which has also probably lend itself to, the health results as well from lack of testing potentially. And I can't speak for his program, and maybe one day I can get him on and have him speak for himself, to see where it's going. But, if it was me and I had a Baxter offspring, that would probably be my first move, is to take it back to something daily and, find that find
Yeah,
that
I
healthy
would like.
medium.
I
Yeah,
really would. I would like to maybe have the maybe not a full blood daily dog. Well, even a full blood daily dog would do. I would
yeah,
still do that, but also use that daily dog to maybe breed it to my Tim Tam, and then offspring of that back to the Baxter offspring. Or take a daily female, breed it to my Oni, because what he has is definitely size and bone. Um, that would end up, and then mix that with one of the Baxter offsprings. That will be pretty
yeah.
cool.
So let's go back, and you're currently still working and performing dog sport. How much working ability do you hold in your program? We talked about, I think you and I have talked behind the scenes about Maggie's program and that it's a numbers game with her. She has enough dogs and enough breedings that if a dog's not really performing, to where she wants it, it's not that it's excluded from the program, but it's also, there's other dogs to go in and win the trophies with. You have a smaller kennel because of your own, criteria that you're trying to stay within for your marriage and your living situation. Um, how important is it that a dog reaches a certain threshold within the working titles?
Mm, as long as I have one to work with, I would also keep a female if she would not break the the cut to be a good IGP dog to try with. You can only work so many, and I'm really. I have a lot of respect for Maggie, who works so many. It doesn't appear so, but she does. For me, two is more than enough. You know, you have to go tracking, you have to do obedience, you have to do the IGP stuff. And besides that, you go to the shows, you have the puppies, you raise the puppies, you talk to the owners, you have the client. Well, you know
Mhm.
what that is about. And then you add on a sport that has three faces that have all to be trained differently. You also need a decoy you can rely on and who's willing to walk to work these dogs. And I tell you what, to find a decoy that's willing to work my 54 kilogram huge monster is not so easy. Um, so maybe a little bit easier with the females because they're slightly lighter. But the guys I was working with all the time were actually quite success orientated IGP guys. So they would see it as a waste of their time to work a dog that's not worth it.
Oh, okay. So 2 things that are interesting there is A, that the larger the dog, the harder it is to find a decoy willing to catch the dog, which is
Yeah.
understandable. Um, and I've had this conversation numerous times where I've had people contact me asking for a 120-pound male, and I'm like, I just can't produce that. Like a 75 to 85-pound male is a lot of dog. Like that's a lot of dog when they really are trying to come at you. For you, I'm assuming that's twice the weight. So, um, it the other part that's interesting is that those decoys are so they're trophy hunting, I guess, is a little bit of what they want to have a
I
dog
know,
win.
but they are German Shepherd guys, you know? They are full blood German
Yes, yeah,
Shepherd
they wanna
guys.
win with the dogs that they're training. They wanna see success from the outcome of training the dog.
Yeah, and then there's another thing what's culturally different in Germany. We don't have these training facilities where you pay for the training. We have the club system where you're just a member of the club and they work your dog for
Mm,
nothing.
okay,
Yeah? They hold their bones for your pleasure and
yeah.
your dog. No money involved.
Which, honestly, I wish we had that a little bit more here because I probably would be a little bit more involved with the working stuff. Um, but like you said, and I think you touched on this, you know, Maggie and Richard, that's their 1%
Yeah. Yeah, I'm jealous because she has that guy there.
of anybody that's truly breeding dogs. And to balance a full-time job, children, dog dog
Yeah.
breeding, 1%, yeah, you're not gonna be working multiple dogs. It's just you gotta
Yeah.
yeah,
Two.
I know for me, children, dog, so I leave the house in the morning, I burn an hour going to work, I work for 8 hours, I burn an hour getting my home. So I
Yeah.
got 10
Yeah.
hours gone, and then when I get home, you know, dinner, workout, and then it's dogs till about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, and then I sit down for an hour, and it's time to go to bed.
See, and that's why it's easier for me to have mine like as part of the house. So at least I skip the kennel cleaning. Yes, it means I have more cleaning in the house, but kids make quite a lot of dirt as well.
Young, right? They're what,
Yeah,
10-ish, somewhere in there? 8.
8.
Oh boy. Oh boy. Yeah, 8, that's pretty young. Yeah, not going back to that anytime soon. Um, yeah, but, yeah, it's interesting to understand. So, I think for a lot of people, they need to take in, um, the accountability of breeding within their household and the strain that it comes with. Um All right. So I don't want to keep you too long. I know we're on a 6-hour difference and we're pushing probably midnight or later. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah. Okay. So
1:23,
I'm gonna cut this loose. I want to wrap it up. Um,
but
and
that's fine. It's
yeah,
weekend
I
tomorrow.
appreciate your time with this. Let me ask you something, and I've asked this, and maybe you've heard this being asked. Um, back in and I'll say like the 40s, 50s, and 60s, probably even into the 70s, when it came to dog breeding, especially working dogs, it always seemed to revolve around men and the dog man, if you will. And it seems like more, yes,
Horseman.
and it seems like more within recent times that the premier breeding programs have always been led by women. What do you think the success of women being in dogs in more current times with the way that, kind of the working woman has evolved and a little bit more independence away from the home and away from children, and their infusion into breeding. Where do you think the success has been? Where does it stem from?
Hmm. Well, I wouldn't say they're more successful than men. I don't know. Isn't it 50-50
Well,
at the moment?
when you look at your more current breedings that you've done with people, have they been more with women-based programs or have they been with men?
Hmm. Well, at the beginning, it was more with men, to be honest. But now you're right. Now it's leaning more towards women. But I don't know if it's. I don't know. When I first started, there was, well, Len Miller, Greg Souza. Well, there were other men around at that time, but I didn't have that contact to them. Then I had a close friend, Glenn Andrews, actually, who started breeding American Bulldogs, was very close with me. There was Colin and Tracy, but it was mainly Colin from England who had that breeding program. Now you seem to be right somehow. In Germany, it's mainly. Is there any male breeder in Germany
You
at the
tell me, you
moment?
live there. I don't know.
Well, maybe not. Definitely not from the
Yeah.
old ones. Um, there's Denise, there's Heike Henneman, there's some of the newer ones, but I would say they're either couples or they're women. Yeah, then now I'm in contact with Maggie, there's
Mhm.
Monique, although Monique is not breeding at the moment, I
Stephanie,
think.
you've worked with, Jennifer
Yeah,
Blevins.
Stephanie, of
Jennifer
course.
Blevins, and I think maybe not directly, but maybe
Oh,
on
Sonia, I
Sonia.
worked.
Yep.
Well, I had a dog from Sonia at a
Yep.
point. That was from Jennifer's
Right.
male, actually.
Caddy. Yep.
Yeah, obviously, somehow it seems to change. We are taking over
Yeah,
the
but why?
world.
That's the question. Why? What makes women be successful in breeding right now?
I think. Well, at least they have quite a good hand with the whole whelping
Okay.
thing. I wouldn't say that men don't have that, but to a point, I see more like the midwife there, maybe. And some of that is definitely our job. And then with raising kids, raising puppies, is like,
So that's your answer. You think raising kids and raising puppies is the same real way? I
well,
mean, your
to a
children
point,
are
it
only 8,
definitely
so you
is.
don't even know if you're successful yet. Yeah, they have to be adults
No,
first.
I'm far
Yeah.
away from
I
calling
always
me
tell
successful on
everyone,
that.
and I think we discussed we're roughly the same age, but, my children are a little bit older, but I think I tell everyone that's younger, that's just getting started, that the real work with kids doesn't begin until they turn 13. Till they're teenagers, then it really kicks in. Like, you're like,
You
yeah,
scare me.
you have to find out what kind of parent you truly wanna be at 13, with your children. So
I have 5 more years.
good luck.
No, I actually I don't know. It's well, one thing is most probably all these things around the whelping process that makes women successful, and maybe their tendency to really stick up with the whole puppy thing because that leads you to know the puppies and that leads you to maybe pick the right
Yeah,
puppies.
I would argue if I was gonna play devil's advocate, I would say that just because you're good at whelping doesn't mean you're great at breeding. Yeah,
No, no,
yeah,
I'm not saying that 100%. I'm just
yeah.
searching for reasons because actually, I don't know why. Well, for my point, I can. No, it doesn't apply because I also did it when I was working full time. At the moment, I'm only working part time, so maybe that plays
Yeah.
into the game. But I still did the same thing when I was working full time, so that's not the reason why. But maybe we have to look. It's in other areas too, isn't it? It's in the sports world. It used to
Yeah.
be a plain men's world in the dog sports
Mhm.
area, but that's changing
Yeah.
too.
No, 100%. Well,
And
we'll chalk it up to you have no idea.
I have
Yeah.
no idea.
So let me ask you,
I'm
we'll
clueless.
finish on this note. Let's talk about notable dogs that you feel have impacted your program and the breed in general. Which dogs do you think stand out to you when you do a quick recap of your breeding program and dogs that you kind of seek out to use? What's been the staple in those pedigrees?
Well, I like these, and I think they had a big influence on my program. Are these West Coast
Mhm.
hybrids, going back to Koa and his background, um, and well, then the daily stuff on the other side, which I say the daily stuff because, well, we have been about it. It's pretty close bred, all of them. Yes, I just had one. Breeding, it was Venus and Mustang
Yes.
Pete. I think that made
Yeah.
Maori. And I really like Pete, but I also
Venus
like
was the one that
Venus.
stands out to
So
me, and that yeah, Venus is definitely a dog I lend towards.
yeah, I liked her so, and I think she therefore to point. Well, there we come back to those markings because she had this slightly pulled in eye patch that
Yeah,
Fafanaki
maybe you've
had.
learned something in this podcast. Color genetics are
um,
everything to me, and I will never say different. Um, there's always gonna be outliers, but if you have a unique marking that travels through your genetics, that dog always seems to lend towards those genetics.
yeah, so I will have to
Yeah,
follow that
yeah.
definitely and check that out. Yeah, but so Venus on the bully side, and then Koa on the hybrid side. Um, and I think I would still, and then my own Aussie actually, who came down from Koa and
Mhm.
Matthias, he really imprinted my program and
Yeah, I
still
saw him
does.
used quite a bit in your stuff. Um, and you've recently toyed with a bunch of other stuff. You've toyed with Caddy. I think you had some NorCal stuff in there. Um, have
Mhm.
you seen any strengths or weaknesses in any of that other stuff?
Mm, let's say it's no more in my
Yeah.
program.
And, and that's the thing. It's like, it's not a disparaging thing to anybody that was either predates us or is currently involved. But at the end of the day, we all have to understand what's working. And if we want to get to a better bulldog, we have to be able to talk about the problems and the good side to whatever dogs are out there. Um, and I'm super curious to see where this Baxter puppy goes, Bolt, because he for me seems to really fit that phenotype, and he's line bred on the mother, and I find a lot of value in that. So I'm watching that pup pretty closely. Um, probably would have if I was in a different position would have picked up a pup off that litter, but well, I appreciate your time, Gesa. It's really been good. I think you and I have had some great conversations behind the scenes. We are very like-minded in the way that we approach dogs. I may have done some things a little different than you have, but I think those conversations are what lend to the bigger picture and bringing some game plans together, breeding strategies, if you will. Um, and maybe in the future we can work together. So I'm going to let you get to sleep, and I appreciate you coming on.